So as we honor Memorial Day, some of you read my blog post this week, and while we honor Memorial Day, we're so grateful for all of those who served. I think that for me, the greatest way that I can honor that legacy, and I think the greatest way that we can honor that legacy, is to do everything we possibly can to ensure that we no longer have to have a Memorial Day. That we live in a world where we know that we are all God expressing, love expressing, and that conflict, war, is just a distant memory. I believe we can do that. I believe we can live in such a world. But as the song said that we read the words to earlier, it begins with me. And it begins with you. It begins with me claiming peace in my own heart. And it begins with me expressing love in the world. It begins with me. And it begins with me and with you, with us, loving ourselves right where we are, bringing peace to our own minds and our own hearts. If we are to know peace in the world, then we must know that peace in our own hearts. And there are many teachers, I guess all spiritual teachers, many current teachers and authors talk about how we need to love ourselves. But they don't always tell us how. How do we do that? How do we love? Love is one of those words that gets kind of confusing sometimes. How do we really love? And I think we have two great teachers, many great teachers, obviously, but two that come to mind are Jesus and the Buddha. And Jesus said this, "Love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. From anyone who takes away your coat, do not withhold even your shirt. Give to everyone who begs from you, and if anyone takes away your goods, do not ask for them again." Pretty radical teaching for Jesus' time and for ours, right? And similarly, the Buddha in the Dhammapada says this, "Hatreds do not ever cease in this world by hating, but by love. This is an eternal truth. Overcome anger by love, overcome evil by good, overcome the miser by giving, overcome the liar by truth." Pretty radical teaching. But they're both teaching from the consciousness of oneness, the consciousness of unity, which is the consciousness of perfect peace and perfect love. And so, as I thought about that this week, we often take those words to mean do that to other people. If somebody is persecuting you, love them. Somebody does bad to you, then love them anyway. And that's good, and that's right, and that's how we express it. And as I said earlier, it begins with me. Where does that begin? Who is our greatest critic? Who persecutes us the most? Well, for me, it's me. I don't know about you. Criticizes ourselves the most. How do we love ourselves in that? Well, first, I think we have to just love that part of us. To love even that critical voice. Because when we love that critical voice in our heads, that critical voice cannot abide. However, if we keep pushing it away, if we keep denying it, if we somehow want it to go away, it's going to make itself known another way. Have you noticed? And so love is that power that can transform even our own critical voice. The other thing I've noticed about that is even if I think my criticism is about someone else or my judgment is about someone else, guess what? It ain't. It's about me. It's about me. And that's sometimes a hard pill to swallow. Even though I may judge someone else, I can always find that within myself. As they say in the 12 steps, if you spot it, you got it. Have you heard that before? If you spot it, you got it. And I know that's difficult for some of us to believe, but I think it's true. I noticed for myself, I was aware of that. This week, when I'm preparing to do a talk, I have to live what I'm going to talk about, and sometimes that ain't fun, because I get to explore myself. Where does this show up for me? And I was noticing myself this week, someone was very determined to have their way in a particular situation. And I was judging that person as being demanding, as being unwavering, as being somehow bad or wrong. And there was that separation between us. And I thought, oh, where's that within you? Oh, I don't ever do that. I don't ever demand my own way. Well, guess what? Even in that situation, because we had different ways of looking at the same thing, I was holding on to my idea. They were holding on to their idea. So it shows up in me as well. Who is my enemy? Love your enemies, Jesus said. Who is my enemy? Where is my enemy? My enemy occurs right here in my own head. My enemy is my judgmental thoughts. My enemy is my thoughts that are not in alignment with my truth or your truth. So it begins with me. I get to love even my critical thoughts. And as I love my critical thoughts begin to transform. Have you noticed? It's a great practice for us to engage in, as Jesus said. We talk about metaphysics. We are a metaphysical Christianity. Metaphysics is what happens within our own consciousness. And we know that everything is born in consciousness first. So when Jesus said, love your enemies, he wasn't just saying, fake it till you make it. Have you heard that term? Just act as if? I don't think he was saying that, although sometimes that can help. But truly loving comes from first loving ourselves, developing a consciousness of love. And in that consciousness of love, it begins to be demonstrated in our lives. Jesus also said in that same teaching, if somebody takes your coat, give them your shirt. What does that mean? What does it mean for us metaphysically? Well, I had a good opportunity to experience that this week too, at least in my own understanding. What is a shirt? What is a coat? It's a covering. It's something that covers us. Metaphysically, what could that represent? To me, it represents some idea I have about myself that I'm allowing to cover up my true identity. It's some idea of ego, some idea of who I am not that covers up who I am. And so I think it's a very deep teaching. It's not just practical. If somebody takes your coat, don't get into a fight with them. Give them your shirt too. That's important too. But metaphysically, metaphorically, to me it's like, if somebody challenges some idea or wants to rip away some idea of myself that is not who I am, then let it go. And if you let that go, then let the next layer go too. And I had an opportunity. I'm so glad Jay's not here today. We came over to the church the other day to borrow some tables. And some of the, if you haven't tried to lift some of these old tables, they are heavy. They are solid wood. And so we got a dolly out, and we put the tables on the dolly, and we were rolling the dolly out over to our house next door. Well, if you have experienced our parking lot, you know it's kind of bumpy. So it wasn't just a smooth sailing. So the tables start falling, start wobbling, and I'm trying to hang on to the back, and Jay's in the front, and they start slipping back and slipping forward, and all of a sudden, Jay just yells at me, "Push down on the back!" I mean, yelled at me. And guess what? I yelled back. I said, "I am. Don't yell at me." But it was a lot louder than that. Even over the traffic on University, you probably could have heard me. But what I realized about that is that I had an opportunity to let that coat go. One, the coat is that idea that I have of myself that I'm always peaceful, that I'm spiritual. I don't get upset. I'm sure you all experience me that way, right? Well, that went out the window. And my shirt was that I always have to do it right. I have to be the one that knows. And I have to do it right. And I don't want somebody telling me I'm not doing it right. That's a big trigger for me. So I have the choice to let that coat go, let that shirt go, at least in the moment. I'm not saying I won't put it back on. But every time we take it off, the more we get to see our true self. How do I really want to show up in that situation? And that was an important lesson for me. And Jay's Mr. NVC. And so he was so calm. I was like, wow, this is so unusual for you. But see, in the moment, he was my enemy. But he wasn't ever my enemy. He was my teacher. Right? He was my teacher. And he was able to see me through the eyes of love, even in that. Even in that. And so it's an important lesson for us to learn. And then the last piece of that I want to talk about is, he didn't say, this is not the quote, but Jesus also said, if someone forces you to walk a mile with them, walk 2. Go the extra mile. Now, in Jesus' day, in Israel, it was occupied by the Romans, you know that, and it was perfectly acceptable for Roman soldiers to inscript a Jew to carry their burden for a mile. And Jesus said, don't just go 1 mile, go 2 miles. What does that mean for us? I think for me it really means that it's not to be a victim, not to think of ourselves as a victim. Because when you're a victim, when you think of yourself as a victim, you want to fight back. You want to resist. And Jesus said, don't think of yourself as a victim. Instead, decide to give out of love. Give out of love, even if you're not in control of what's happening in the moment. That's a tough one too, isn't it, sometimes? It's tough for us to think when we're not in control, how can we possibly be loving? How can we possibly be the love of God to the one who is abusing us or opposing us? And I thought about that this week because I know a lot of people have experienced abuse. A lot of people have experienced situations where you are powerless. And so I struggled with that a bit. How does that look? What does that look like? What am I saying to people? And so what came to me as I meditated on that was, I remembered the words of Viktor Frankl, who was a survivor of the Holocaust, wrote the book, The Man's Search for Meaning. And this is what he said: we who lived in concentration camps can remember the men who walked through the huts comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread. They may have been few in number, but they offer sufficient proof that everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. If a man who was in a concentration camp, suffering the abuses of the Nazi Germans, can see how to be love, how to claim the power that we have, I think we can too. We can bring peace to our own hearts and our own minds. And then the next slide is also from Viktor Frankl. For the first time in my life, I saw the truth as it's set into song by so many poets, proclaimed as the final wisdom by so many thinkers, the truth that love is the ultimate and highest goal to which man can aspire. Then I grasped the meaning of the greatest secret that human poetry and human thought and belief have to impart. The salvation of man is through love and in love. And that love begins with you. That love begins with me. That love begins with every choice we make to find peace within us. Because only when we have peace within us, through the power of love, will we be able to bring peace to the world. Only through the power of love will we be able to experience a day when Memorial Day is simply a memory, where our children and their children, our children's children, do not know anyone who died in war. But war ends